your man, Louie Tee, here with this limited exclusive series, Quarterback Conundrum. Every year, some of the biggest names force teams to make some of the biggest decisions at the most prominent position in their lives, the quarterback conundrum. There's no more polarizing figure in the upcoming 2024 NFL draft than the guy that will ultimately be the number one overall pick, quarterback Caleb Williams of USC. So it's been a whirlwind 3-year period for Caleb Williams, first showing up on the OU campus, sitting behind Spencer Rattler, taking over in the Red River shootout or Red River rivalry or whatever the hell they call it now, and bringing them back from a large deficit to a win, and all of a sudden going down in Oklahoma folklore as one of the best young quarterbacks that university has ever seen. Unfortunately for OU fans, Lincoln Riley would be lured away to USC, and with him he would take Caleb Williams. Off to SC he went, to the land of palm trees, sun, and fun. However, with that came a lot of things that he had never experienced before. And thus, we kind of watched his life and his career at USC sort of play out like a movie. And because of that, there are a lot of question marks surrounding Caleb Williams as we head into this draft process. Now, one thing that is undeniable about Caleb Williams is that he has immense talent, okay? And if we're just going off of a talent and a skill set, there's no one in this draft that matches his abilities. However, he's far from a perfect prospect. He holds on to the ball too long, trying to create. He takes sacks in doing that. In some of his biggest games of his career against some of the best defenses he's seen in his collegiate career, he's come up short. 3 times against Utah, including in the Pac-12 championship in 2022. And then this year, also losing to Notre Dame. Another really top-notch defense in which he struggled mightily, arguably his worst performance as a collegiate athlete. 3 interceptions thrown in that ball game on a big national stage. He's also lost to the Washington Huskies, but wouldn't qualify them as one of the better defenses in college football. Simply, they were outscored by the Huskies. That said, he won the Heisman Trophy in 2022. He is already an icon in the sport. Numerous endorsements. You see him all over your television, whether it's Dr. Pepper or it's something else. And thus, he's already making money. And so the question now becomes, is he entitled? Is he one of these new age pampered athletes? Is this a guy you can invest in as your face of the franchise quarterback, number 1 overall pick, the guy that is supposed to take you to the promised land? Is he ready for that type of responsibility? Let's go through the Caleb Williams timeline and talk about why he's so polarizing, yet irresistible if you're a team at number 1 looking to draft a quarterback that could potentially change the fortunes of your franchise. Let's dive in to Caleb Williams and his QB conundrum. So the first thing, and we're going to try to do this in chronological order so that we can kind of keep in the spirit of how these things happened and what the reaction was to it. Because as we know, for every action, there's an opposite and equal, sometimes unequal reaction. And so no different here with Caleb Williams. So the first thing that jumped out at people was back in 22, his Heisman Trophy winning season. That's when the nail painting thing came into focus, and people started talking about him painting his nails, and people talking about him being soft because of it. We'll talk more about the soft label with Caleb Williams a little bit later on. But as you can see, it wasn't what it wasn't him painting his nails, it's what he put on his nails in particular in these two games here that really garnered a ton of attention. As you can see, the first picture is a game against Notre Dame in 2022, where it says F Notre Dame on his nails, right? As you can see, the next week against Utah, he had a message for the Utah Utes on his nails, F Utah. So, again, is that the kind of message you want? Is that what you look for in a franchise quarterback? Again, it's not just the act, but it's also the mental side of that, the maturity, if you will. And he's, again, he's a young guy. And I always take this into consideration when you're talking about young adults here. He's still got growing to do. And I don't know if this occurred again in 2023. This was in 2022. I don't recall this ever coming up again in 2023. He did paint his nails, but I don't think there was anything ever actually painted on them, but I could be wrong about that. Anyway, the nails that you see specifically from the Notre Dame game prompted a controversy the following year in 2023 when the Trojans came to South Bend, Indiana to take on Notre Dame. Obviously, Williams did not play well. They lose the game. He throws 3 interceptions. He doesn't look like the guy that everybody was touting as the future number 1 overall pick in the 2024 NFL draft. And that prompted a fan from Notre Dame to run on the field and take a little selfie of him. And also, he said, what about those painted nails now? And so he was trolling Caleb Williams, to which Caleb Williams had to then respond a little bit later on because the media kept asking him about that interaction. So, those types of things are unnecessary. You bring that kind of undue stress and attention to yourself by doing things like that just aren't necessary. So hopefully he's learned from that. But we continue on. There's more, right? So understand that when you draft a kid, you're not just drafting him, you're also drafting everything that comes with him. That includes family members, specifically dads, who are usually very open and public about their child. I don't blame. As a father myself, it's easy for someone to look at a situation from the outside looking in and criticize someone. But when you're a father, you want what's best for your child. Do you always go about it the right way? That's debatable, right? But still, that's at the core of anything that is done for your child. You want the best for your child, right? So I say that because in July, and we'll get to this particular article in the relevance here in a second, I do want to remind you that in July of 2023, there was an article written in ProFootballTalk.com by Mike Florio that outlined a rumor that Caleb Williams wanted ownership stake in whatever team was going to draft him. Now, at that time, there was not a rule in place that said you couldn't, but everybody understands that there is a conflict of interest if that takes place, right? So quickly, the NFL adopted a rule that states that no player can own a stake in any NFL team while they're active. So that killed that. No coach, no player, any of that. So that was dead. So that's not something that we need to address any longer, but it was a thing for a while there. So wanted to bring that up. So now we fast forward to September of 2023. GQ article, all right? Big spread in GQ. They do a whole layout of Caleb Williams, this massive article, and it's a good read. You really get in depth to how he grew up, how he was essentially, I don't know if any of you out there are familiar with the Todd Marinovich story and how he was essentially trained to be a professional football player from the time he was born. It's not as extreme as that, but it's on par with that for Caleb Williams. Like, he's been trained to become the player that he has become since he was a kid. Anyway, in this GQ article, Caleb Williams talks about how he's always been told what to do. There's always been structure in his life, and he's always had the opportunity to choose, to make a decision as to where he would play, or someone would make that decision for him. Going into the NFL, that obviously is not your option any longer. Once you enter the draft, whoever wants to take you, takes you. And you have to then go and play there unless you decide to pull an Eli Manning or John Elway. That said, listen to what Caleb Williams said, and then also listen to what his father, Carl, had to say on the matter. So I'll read you this excerpt from the GQ article from September of 2023. It's a strange thing to realize on draft day for the first time, Caleb Williams won't get to decide what happens. And this is Caleb Williams speaking now. Quote, I've always been able to choose the team that I've played on. And then everything's been scheduled for me. I've had a plan for treatment. I've had a plan for workouts. I've had a plan for eating. I've had a plan for nutrition and things like that. Vitamins, a lot of shrimp and chicken breast and fish. But now going into this next part of my career, it's weird because it's so uncertain. You don't know anything. You can't control anything but how you act, but you and how you act. That's honestly the weirdest part for me, is the uncertainty. Closed quote. Now we'll go on and talk about what his dad, Carl, had to say. His father, Carl, puts a finer point on it. Quote, this is Carl Williams talking now. The funky thing about the NFL draft process is he'd almost be better off not being drafted than being drafted. The system is completely backwards, he says. The way the system is constructed, you go to the worst possible situation, the worst possible team, the worst organization in the league because of their desire for parity that gets the first pick. So it's the gift and the curse. I mean, I've talked to Archie Manning. His career was shot because he went to a horrible organization. I've talked to Lincoln Riley, and Kyler Murray struggled because of where he was drafted. Baker Mayfield struggled mightily because of where he was drafted. The organizations matter. And there's a break in the case of emergency option that Carl is keeping in mind. He's got 2 shots at the apple, he says. So if there's not a good situation, the truth is he can come back to school, closed quote. So obviously his dad caught a lot of flack for that. And people tried to put him in the same basket, if you will, same bucket as, you know, Lonzo Ball's father. I can't remember his dad's name, which is good. It's a good thing I can't remember his name now, because once upon a time he was everywhere, right? Now we don't hear from him at all, which is a good thing. Anyway, I don't think his dad, Carl, has malicious intent. I don't think he's one of those extremely meddlesome fathers that wants to be in control of everything. I just think he wants what's best for his son, which we would all want in that particular situation for our child. That said, the NFL is the NFL, and I think you would be robbing a team that earned the right to draft what is perceived to be the best player in college football to try to help turn around their franchise. You know, it's easy to cherry pick the players that didn't have success in places and say, hey, look at what happened in his career. But you could also look at some of the guys that actually turned around their franchise, like a Peyton Manning. The Colts were the worst. A lot of people don't realize just how bad the Indianapolis Colts were when Peyton Manning got there. They were one of the worst run organizations. They were probably the 3rd most important organization in the state of Indiana at the time. It was that bad, right? So Peyton Manning changed the fortunes of that franchise, period. End of discussion. And we could go down the list of quarterbacks showing up somewhere, whether it's free agency, via a trade, or the draft, and coming in and changing the fortunes of a franchise. The Carolina Panthers were awful until they got Cam Newton. One guy can change the fortunes of your franchise. And so it is very important to understand that robbing a team of that opportunity, the reason that they suck is, now look, I'm not denying that organizations sometimes are just bad. As a fan of an organization that was the bottom of the barrel, worst of the worst, with the worst owner in pro sports for 25 years almost, I understand that a bad organization is a bad organization, and it's hard to overcome that no matter how good of a player you are. But you have to give that organization and its fans a chance to see if your talents can be the answer to everything that has illed that organization. So while I get it, I also don't like it. I would just, there's, in sports, the way it's set up is set up that way for a reason. He called it parity. The NFL is set up for parity. But also, if you're the worst team in football, shouldn't you get the best pick, which is going to give you the best chance to turn around your fortunes? Going back to school obviously was in play at the time. As I mentioned, this was a GQ article from September of 2023. That decision has already been made. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But we will move on to the next ordeal in the Caleb Williams timeline. So we move to October of 2023, and this rumor starts to spread. And part of that rumor came from the fact that that GQ article pretty much stated that we'll go back to school if it's not a great situation. That came straight from his father's mouth. So now when you hear this, and again, believe half of what you see, none of what you hear, even if it's spat by me, your man Louie Tee. So you got to take all of this with a grain of salt. Anything you get off of social media, anything you get off of the interweb, be careful. Be very, very careful. But as you can see, this tweet was from October the 2nd, 2023. It says, breaking, Caleb Williams says he can make more money returning to USC next season than as a rookie in the NFL, and says he can pick what team he wants to go to because of that. Caleb's only 5 teams he would play for are the Cowboys, Raiders, Vikings, Giants, and 49ers. So, obviously, when I hear things like that, I usually immediately discard them because it didn't come straight from the horse's mouth. You don't know who to believe anymore in this day and age that we live in because everyone's chasing clout. Everyone wants to be the one to break something. Everyone's got sources. And so I just tend to not buy into anything that I hear until I hear it from that source, or at least a reputable source that knows that their reputation is on the line and that they're not just going to put out anything, right? Anyway, I digress. So now going back to February of 2023, where Caleb Williams was featured in a People's Magazine article. And this excerpt that you see is from that article. Now, I never think it's in the best interest of a future prospect who is heading into a draft here shortly, whether it be in 6 months, 8 months, a year. I never think it's a great idea to talk about where you would like to play. To me, that's a losing battle. You don't want to do that, right? But to each its own, right? There's no crime against that. In this People's Magazine article, he talks about where he would like to play, particularly. So again, this is in February, early 2023. He writes, or he says, and this is Caleb Williams, quote, I like to be around younger coaches. I'd probably go to the Dolphins. I also would be able to play with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Mike Gesicki, that defense isn't bad. Probably my number one spot. The article then writes, not only does Williams think that the team has a talented roster, the aesthetics and Florida lifestyle help too. And this is Caleb Williams speaking again. Quote, I also like the colors. The colors are pretty cool and the weather's good. Then the article continues, but Williams makes it clear he'd be appreciative of wherever his name ends up getting called when the time comes to go to the NFL. Quote, this is from Caleb Williams again. San Fran, Raiders, or Falcons, Williams says of other teams who are at the top of his list to play quarterback for one day. I'd play anywhere, close quote. That last line, those last three words, I'd play anywhere, are very important because it stresses that while I would desire to play in certain places, I would prefer to play there, I will play anywhere that I'm drafted. Now, if you take that at face value, then everything else you hear, you should disregard. Okay? He may want to play, and a lot of players come out and want to play for specific teams. But again, that's not up to you. So once I heard that, once I read that, there's nothing else to talk about, right? So all these rumors about he'd only play for 5 teams, et cetera, if he really felt that way about Chicago, he could have gone back to school. His dad already said that option existed, right? So again, they'll talk to Caleb Williams during this process. They'll vet him. They'll figure out what's true and what's not true. Hey, if we draft you, will you come to Chicago? And he'll tell them. He'll tell them what his situation is, or he'll have his agent, or he'll have someone reach out and tell them, we don't want to play for your organization. And they'll know. And that's probably why Chicago is kind of straddling the fence right now with all the decisions that they've made, that they could go in either direction, right? Because they still got to find out. But he said, I'd play anywhere. So when you read something like this from NFC North News that says he'd only play for 5 teams, articles like the one in February from People's Magazine kind of lend you to believe that he might have made a statement like this. And trust me, Caleb Williams is making very good money. Okay, NIL deals have changed the game. I've talked about this in other videos. They've changed the game forever. These players no longer are desperate to get to the NFL. The hunger isn't the same as it once was. You're making, depending on your stardom, you're making millions upon millions of dollars at the collegiate level. Again, it's different. He's making Dr. Pepper commercials. He's making Heisman House commercials for Nissan. He's all over the place. The guy's making money hand over fist already. So I don't doubt that he said he could make more money. He probably did say that. But we can't be assured of that. But anyway, just know that he's already on record as saying he'd play anywhere. Take it at face value. So we move on to the next part of this Caleb Williams saga, which is so fascinating. So he was criticized in October. Before we get to what you see on the screen in front of you, he was criticized in October of 2023 for not shaking hands with the Utah Utes after a loss, a close 2-point loss to them. He didn't get off the bench and he didn't shake anyone's hand. That to me was really petty. I thought it was, most of the people complaining about it were Utah Ute fans who just were in their feelings and wanted to, bash the young kid. At the end of the day, you're not obligated to shake anybody's hand. We're in this new day and age where everybody's buddy and friends and swapping jerseys. I remember watching the divisional round game against the Lions against the Bucks, and Baker Mayfield throws that back-breaking interception. They lose the game, and after the game, he's posing with the Lions player, smiling, cheesing, and I'm like, that's not how I would react to throwing the game-clinching interception. That's not how I would be on the field a minute later, right? But that's to each its own, right? Some guys have the ability to compartmentalize in that moment, shake somebody's hand and smile for the cameras and all of that good stuff, dap him up. It's a guy you might have known back in college and y'all were really tight, and this is the first time you've seen him in a couple years. Cool, right? Caleb Williams isn't one of those dudes, right? He takes losing to heart. It's not something he's done very often in his career. We're going to talk about that here in a second. So this is something that he's getting used to. Again, we're watching this guy's life kind of play out in front of us like it's the Truman Show. And so everything that happens with him is heavily scrutinized, and we're watching him go through his emotions in front of us. So with that said, in November of 2023, one of the big storylines of that month was Caleb Williams crying after a loss to Washington. As you can see, there was a post here by Robert Griffin III. And this is what Robert Griffin III had to say about the image that we all saw of Caleb Williams running over to the stands, jumping up into the crowd, into his mom's arms, and weeping after a tough loss to Washington. Robert Griffin III writes, watching Caleb Williams sobbing in his family, with his family after losing the game will break your heart. This young man pours his heart out for his team every time he plays. Any NFL team would be lucky to have him as their QB, and this emotion shows how much this game means to him. So that's one way of looking at it. That's one perspective. And what I will say is, I don't think people understand. Grown men cry after losses. Grown men cry after wins. Just depends on who you are and how you deal with things. Some people cry tears of joy. I don't cry when I'm excited. When I'm excited, I'm excited. There's all smiles. There's not a tear to be found. But after a tough loss, grown men cry. They just usually do it in the locker room away from the cameras. That's it. Don't fool yourself into thinking, oh, he's soft because he's crying. Grown men cry in NFL locker rooms. Grown men cry in NBA locker rooms. Grown men cry in MLB and NHL locker rooms. You just don't see it. He just didn't do it after the game was over, away from the cameras. He did it in front of the cameras. That was his only sin, if you will, if you want to call it that. Anyway, Robert Mathis, former Indianapolis Colts famed pass rusher, who is currently a coach in the NFL for the Indianapolis Colts. Or last time I checked, I think he was, writes in response to Robert Griffin III about Caleb Williams crying after the Washington loss. Sorry, RG3. All love, little bro. But I got to chalk this one up in the soft category. He ran and jumped into the stands to his mommy and cried. I always tell players I'll never lie to him. And this is not the look you want from your trigger man. So that's another perspective, right? So you've gotten two different perspectives on opposite ends of the spectrum. Also, Rob Gronkowski chimed in, and as many players did, and he said it was weird to see him do that. And he said, and then he added to that, maybe he's a mama's boy. I mean, like, that's the kind of narrative that's garbage, right? But I mean, hey, it is what it is. That, you know, that's the kind of scrutiny that comes with being Caleb Williams, right? You kind of got to know what you're signing up for. You know, when you take all of this money, when you train at 5 a.m. in the morning, because this is what you wanted, right? This is what you asked for. This is what comes with it. So then Caleb Williams obviously had to respond to all of the scrutiny and all of the criticism from the whole crying situation. And so his first response after this went viral, essentially, was this quote that he had, and I'll read them to you. Quote, "It's something that I've been doing since I was young, and now on a national level, being able to try and share that awareness with the public. Me doing just what I did on Saturday, even though it was far from what I was trying to do, it showed and spread that kind of awareness." He says, "I go out every single day, blood, sweat, and tears. I give my all on every single play, every chance that I get. I've been an advocate for mental health. Show your emotions and express yourself," Williams said. So On social media, Williams said that he is an emotional person and wants to spread mental health awareness. That's part of where those two quotes came from. My wife has been one of the biggest impacts on me from a mental health awareness standpoint, because I consider myself a mentally tough individual. Things don't usually get under my skin. I don't get bothered or rattled very easily. And before my wife, I looked at everything through my own lens. So if you weren't like me, then I had a problem with the way you handled things. And it was her explaining to me how people handle things differently and how it may vary and differ from how you handle it and how you look at it, but not everybody processes things the same. And so as you continue to grow, you learn, right? And I think football is a very macho sport, right? And ego is at its highest. Or, when I was a massive wrestling fan, my favorite wrestler was Razor Ramon, and they would say he's oozing machismo, right? That's what football is all about, oozing machismo. And so it's not okay to cry in front of the cameras, right, after a loss, because it's such a macho and manly sport. But what I've learned is mental health is real. And who am I to talk about how someone else deals with something that they feel like is worthy of crying about? Who am I to tell someone what their mental health is or isn't? I don't play those games anymore, right? If someone says, hey, my mental health is important and this is how I deal with things, as long as it's a safe way, a safe outlet, I'm all for it. Knock yourself out. And so Williams added to that in another article down the road addressing this same situation. He writes, and this is an article, and I'll read the entire excerpt here. Notably, Williams took some criticism for crying to his mother in the crowd after USC lost to Washington on November the 4th. But he doesn't seem concerned about how that might affect his perception as he potentially advances to the next level. Quote, and this is Caleb Williams, "There's a time and a place for everything. But I'm far from ashamed about showing my emotion after any of the losses this year. It shows truth. It shows care. All that. I'm getting better at it, showing it in the right place in the right time. But if I won a national championship or a Super Bowl years down the line, if I was winning, nobody would be saying anything." Which he's not wrong about that. So, and you see he's growing, right? He's showing growth by showing it in the right place. It's okay to cry. Nobody's telling you don't cry. Just don't let everybody see you doing it. And I know that might seem stupid to some of you. It may be frivolous where you do it at, but this is the scrutiny that comes with being Caleb Williams. You're in the public eye, and because of that, you got to be mindful of when and where and how you do things. That's just the life that that's the life that you take on when you become the type of celebrity that Caleb Williams is, right? So as we move forward, we continue in December now of 2023. And before we get to that, there's a loss to UCLA at the end of the season. They played their rival. They lose the game. And after that game, Caleb Williams doesn't speak to the media. He's supposed to show up at the podium, speak to the media, talk about the loss. He wants no part of it. He leaves. That's a sign of immaturity. You can't have that, right? You don't want that, especially from a quarterback. When Marshawn Lynch decides not to show up as the running back, who cares? He's a running back. He doesn't have to be the leader of the team, right? But the quarterback does have to be the leader of the team. So when things are good, when things are bad, you still need that guy to show up for you, regardless of what the circumstances are. Period. That's a part of the assignment. That's a part of the job. Again, he's young. That is immaturity, but he can learn and grow from that. And that's why this right here is so important that we're about to talk about. So, first things first. Caleb Williams liked a tweet, and this got a lot of attention. He liked a tweet, or an Instagram post, rather, that of a Bears fan saying, we don't want Caleb Williams, we want Marvin Harrison Jr., and we want to keep Justin Fields. So I'll read you this tweet quickly. This is from JPA Football, who writes, trending. Caleb Williams liked a tweet saying that the Bears shouldn't draft him and instead should draft Marvin Harrison. Bears currently have the number 1 pick. And so the Instagram post says, only one option for the Bears in the 2024 NFL draft. It's not Caleb Williams. We want Justin Fields. The answer is Marvin Harrison Jr., and he liked that post. So that got a lot of people thinking that he may not want to go to Chicago. And if they try to draft him, he won't go there. Maybe he's going to go back to school like his dad, Carl, said back in September. They have options. So that got all of that going, right? And the thing about Caleb Williams and what I've seen from him and his family is they don't really address a lot of this stuff to deaden some of these rumors, right? Sometimes the best thing to say is nothing at all. In certain instances, if it's not true, you just leave it alone. But in other instances, like some of these, it's better if you just come out and just say, no, that's not true. We'll play anywhere if that's how you feel, right? But when you let these things that have legs continue to walk and then ultimately run and sprint, they start to take on a life of their own if you don't dead them, right? So this next excerpt is from Caleb Williams talking about this past season in 2023 and how tough of a season it was and how it was a massive learning experience for him. I want you to take a listen to what he had to say as he reflects on what was a tough but important 2023 season for him. And you listen to why that was. So I'll read you this excerpt. It says, the signal caller said it was one of his, quote, most important years of playing football so far, closed quote. And this is Caleb Williams speaking now. Quote, I've never been in this situation where I'm 7-5 and there's no playoff hopes at the end of the season. I'm dealing with it emotionally, dealing with it spiritually and physically. It's been one of the most important years I think I've had. It's tricky. I've had talks with USC head coach Lincoln Riley because obviously I haven't been through it, or with my family members or people like that, just how to deal with this and lead, how to stay the same person I was before the season or after our first loss or second loss. So it was different. It was a learning process. Closed quote. So essentially what he said there is, I've never dealt with losing at this level before. Sure, I've lost in my career. I haven't been undefeated my entire life. I've lost before, but never have I been in a situation where we've lost this much and there's really nothing to play for at the end of the year. How do I remain me in that situation? How do I cope with, how do I deal with losing? And I think a lot of people, if you've never played sports, then you don't know how to win and how to lose. I'll give you a great example, a personal one. So my son started wrestling, and that was the first time he wrestled in high school. And it was the first time that he had ever engaged in any physical activity or sport, right? Any organized sport. He had done karate as a kid and things of that nature, but he had never been in an actual organized sport where there's wins and losses tallied up. So he had a tough time dealing with losing. I had to teach him how to lose gracefully. Like, you don't want to lose, and that's always the goal, is to find a way to win, strain and find a way to get it done. But in the event that it can't happen, that it doesn't happen, you got to learn to take that in stride as well. And so he had to learn how to lose. So when I see this, it hits different for me because I've seen this play out firsthand. When you're accustomed to winning all the time and then you don't, that's a shock to your senses. And how you process that is going to be different from this guy, that person, her, him, and et cetera, et cetera. And for Caleb Williams, he had to learn how to lose. And him sitting on the sidelines after losing to Utah and not wanting to shake anybody's hand because I can't believe we just lost to them again. This is the third time in my career I've lost to Utah. I can't believe we just lost to them again. That's his way of dealing with it, just sitting there and processing it. He's not cursing anybody out. He doesn't want to fight anybody. He just wants to sit there and reflect. How did we not get it done? Him going and crying to his mom, and that's his way of dealing with the loss to Washington. This was their last chance to be relevant in the Pac-12. They needed that win. They didn't get it. And for all intents and purposes, their season is done. They lose to UCLA in the rivalry game. They dropped to 7-5 on the season. And he doesn't want to speak to the reporters after the game. That's how he dealt with that loss. Is that the right way? No. But that's how he's dealing and coping with losing. He's got to learn to be better. And that's why he said this was such an important season for him, because it's a learning process. It was different for him. When all you're used to doing is winning, and that's the only thing you don't know how to deal with the adversity of losing. So I thought that was really interesting. So you can look at that one of two ways. You can say, hey, he's growing. I like that he's having this introspective look at his situation and understanding that he does need growth and that this season was necessary for him. It was a necessary evil. And that I like that he's continuing to mature as a young man. That's one way of looking at it. The other way is this guy's mentally fragile, right? He's crying. He paints his nails and he doesn't deal with losing very well. And he's having to question himself, and he's got to talk to other people about, how do I stay true to myself? How do I continue to be the leader that I know I should be when we're losing? I don't want that guy as my leader. That's another way to look at it. You got to ask yourself, where do you fall, right? And then lastly, I thought this was the perfect way to end all of this. And I think this is the best advice that anybody's given Caleb Williams. And I've seen a lot of advice that's been given to the young man. And I think this is the best piece of advice that can be given to him. And it's from an OG, somebody that has gone through what he's about to embark upon, someone who's been in his shoes as a fellow Heisman Trophy winner. He can speak on this situation and it should have some kind of impact. I think it should be a profound one, but that's me. This quote that I'm going to read you here is from one Cameron Newton, who had this to say about Caleb Williams on his podcast. Now, giving you some context, he was responding to the reports that Caleb Williams wanted equity in a team and that he also wanted to pick where he went in the NFL, that he didn't want to be drafted by this team or that team, but these were the 5 destinations he wanted to go to. He was responding to all of the rumors surrounding this kid, right? And he was also told about his dad and the things that he had said, and I can go back to school. He can go back to school. There's options here. So this is what Cam Newton had to say. Quote, "For me, I feel like, bro, do you. Set the tone early. But while you're setting that tone, Mr. Caleb, I must admonish you to know this. You got to perform. If you don't perform, this ain't USC. The speed is different. The physicality is different. The preparation is different. Don't nobody care that you won a Heisman." Close quote. So essentially, he's saying, look, bro, go be you. Do the things that make you Caleb Williams. Do the things that make you happy, right? However, understand that they will take all of this shit away from you just as fast as they bless you with it if you don't win. They will turn on you like that if you don't win. It's great to have all these endorsement deals. I think a great example of that is Robert Griffin III. He came in with all this fanfare, This man had all kinds of commercials, Gatorade and McDonald's and you name it. He had it. And he won Rookie of the Year and he was flying high, and then it all got snatched away from him as it went downhill, and it went downhill fast. And if you want to make all of these declarations and you want to ultimately call your own shots, you want to be you want to be Caleb Williams, you got to set the tone early. Wherever you end up, whatever the situation ends up being. Yeah, you might want to play in Miami. Weather's nice. You probably want to play. There's a reason why he said San Francisco. There's a reason why he said Vegas with the Raiders. There's a reason why he said Miami. The weather's nice. Those are great locations to be from a weather standpoint. The aesthetics are great. There's a nightlife in those places, or you're close to somewhere where there's a nightlife and there's things to get into. He's a young guy, right? It's part of the reason players pick certain college institutions to attend. Not always because of, the football program, or not always because of the academics, but can I get into something? Is there something I can get into after all of this is done? At the end of the day, he's going to be judged on how he performs. Everything else will fall into place. All the people that hate him and don't like him and want to see this guy fail, those narratives change very quickly with success. Especially if he's playing for your favorite team. So then the question begs, how do you feel about Caleb Williams? You've got all the information you need. The last bit of that timeline is in January of 2024, Caleb Williams officially declared on the final day that a college and collegiate athlete is able to declare for the NFL draft. He declared for the NFL draft. Listening to a couple of draft beatniks and people who follows college football very closely, like Bruce Feldman, for instance, as to why he waited so late, really trying to dictate, maybe, where he ends up going. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. And I don't know what his rationale for waiting until the last day. We see players, it's a tough decision, as he stated before, or it was a rumor, but I think he said it. I can make more money in college. And he's probably not wrong. He'll sign a rookie contract in the NFL as the number 1 overall pick, and it'll be lucrative, but it may not match the amount of money that he could make going back to USC for a senior season. At the end of the day, the challenge of going to the NFL and becoming great at the highest level there is an allure that few can pass up. All that comes with being an NFL player, if you think the endorsement deals and the NIL deals that you've got in college are good, wait till you get to the NFL and you're any good. He's already signing endorsement deals now before he's even played an NFL snap. Turn out to be the guy that we think you can be, and it'll increase tenfold. So Caleb Williams and all that comes with him. Now, the quarterback conundrum is simply this. Are you willing to spend the number 1 overall pick on a kid that has flaws, that has some growing to do, that is continuing to learn and develop, and we're watching his life play out like a movie on the television screen? There's a lot of baggage that comes with Caleb Williams potentially. But there's also a lot of talent. Which one matters to you most? And will a team take all of this into consideration and decide to pass on him? Or are they going to work with him to continue to help him grow, but also help foster that talent into one of the best quarterbacks potentially in the NFL in 3 to 5 years? I don't know. What says you? Leave it down in the comment section. Caleb Williams or nah? That, my friends, is the QB Conundrum. Till next time, I'm your man Louie Tee. Have a good one.
Louie Tee.